In the wild expanses of Wrangell-St. Elias National Park and Preserve, adventure often intertwines with danger, sometimes leading to tragic outcomes. Mysterious deaths, plane crashes, unfortunate accidents, and unforgiving rivers remind us of the terrible beauty of America's largest national park. Here are 5 stories guaranteed to make your blood run cold. It was about 9:20 in the morning, and Clayton McMartin was aware that he had some weather ahead of him, something any pilot knows could potentially mean trouble. Clayton wasn't the only one aboard the Beechcraft Bonanza B-36. His wife, Melissa, was with him. They were flying to Washington, where they planned to meet their beloved baby grandson and enjoy some quality family time before the hunting season began. This would be Clayton's first moose hunt, an occasion that excited them both. However, the tricky weather and the high terrain of Mount Leaper and Wrangell-St. Elias National Park and Preserve made their flight trickier than expected. On the morning of August 27, 2023, 59-year-old Clayton McMartin and his wife, 58-year-old Melissa McMartin, woke up ready to embark on the journey. Their airplane departed from Snowshoe Lake Airport in Glennallen, Alaska, at 8:50. Their destination was Ketchikan, Alaska, where they would make a first stop. Clayton and Melissa got married in 1986. They had 3 children. They were the kind of people who emanated joy. They loved their life and their adventures, which often took them beyond their wildest dreams. Perhaps that's why the couple had a deep admiration for Alaska, too. They appreciated the last frontier and all that it had to offer. In the past, Clayton and Melissa had spent 3 summers in Alaska, fishing, sightseeing, or simply spending time together. But no matter how much time they spent there, the couple kept marveling at how different Alaska was from their own home in Roanoke, Texas. Soon after they took off, Clayton, who piloted the aircraft, realized that high terrain caused radar contact and radio communications to be intermittent. At about 9:15 that morning, he told air traffic controllers that he was flying under Visual Flight Rules conditions, or VFR. VFR is a set of regulations under which a pilot operates an aircraft in weather conditions generally clear enough to allow the pilot to see where the aircraft is going. The McMartins were flying at an altitude of 12,500 feet. A controller with the Anchorage Air Route Traffic Control Center asked Clayton if he could climb higher. The man confirmed and told the controller he would climb to 13,500 feet. At 9:20, Clayton acknowledged he had some weather ahead of him. But according to the controller, the weather wasn't the only possible obstacle ahead. The terrain was also getting higher, and as such, Clayton's Bonanza needed to climb higher still. Clayton knew this wouldn't be a problem. His aircraft was well equipped. They had oxygen on board and the airplane was turbocharged, which meant it was suitable for higher altitudes. After climbing to 14,000 feet at about 9:30, Clayton got a heads up from the controller. All contact and monitoring would be lost for 10 minutes due to the weather conditions and altitude. Minutes later, when the controller asked Clayton to turn 20 degrees to avoid higher terrain, there was no response. Another pilot was asked to relay the message and Clayton answered. Once contact was re-established with the controller, McMartin asked to climb higher, to an altitude of 15,000 feet. The controller approved the request. 5 minutes later, the McMartin's plane was rapidly descending at 11,000 feet. Nobody answered the controller's frantic questions. The final radar target was at 8,875 feet. The next day, on August 28th, the wreckage was located in a heavily glaciated area with deep crevasses north of Mount Leaper, in the southern part of Wrangell-St. Elias National Park and Preserve, some 18 miles inland from Cape Yakataga, Alaska. But rescuers couldn't reach the area. The unpredictability of the weather, combined with the tricky terrain, prevented any form of rescue. On September 2nd, the National Park Service announced that responders' efforts had shifted from rescue to recovery. Chief Clint Johnson of the Alaska branch of the National Transportation Safety Board expressed his doubt about the likelihood of survival given the remote crash site and the weather conditions. A few days later, a park ranger managed to fly over the area during a break in the weather. What he saw further confirmed Johnson's suspicions. A large portion of the plane was located in a snow crater, with other plane fragments deeply embedded in a highly crevassed part of the Yahtzee Glacier, where snow continually accumulates. The wreckage was declared permanently inaccessible, and Wrangell-St. Elias officials called off all recovery efforts. With a satellite phone in hand, David White wrote a quick message. He then sent the text via InReach, letting his point of contact know he was about to cross Jacksina Creek in Wrangell-St. Elias National Park and Preserve, and proceed with his hunt. It was August 12, 2021, 6 days after he first entered the park. It was the last time he ever spoke with anyone. At 40 years old, David White was an experienced hunter. Being a soldier, White was also physically fit, which helped him navigate the outdoors. But nature is a great force, and not even youth, experience, or physical strength can guarantee our survival when we deal with it. On August 6, 2023, David White entered Wrangell-St. Elias National Park and Preserve. The park is known for its population of Dall sheep. It is also one of the few places in North America where Dall sheep can be hunted. David White wanted to do just that. He was alone, but he trusted his supplies and gear, his satellite phone, and more than anything, his own abilities. Out there, confidence in oneself is crucial. White had hunted sheep in the park in previous years too, so he wasn't exactly inexperienced either. After a few days, the 40-year-old man realized he needed to resupply before he could resume hunting. He went back on August 11th, ready for his endeavor to prove fruitful. Every now and then, the man would send a text to his point of contact. Otherwise, he was completely alone in the wild, closer to the beasts, to the valleys, to the rivers and trees, than to any other human. The following day, on August 12th, David White sent his last message. His plan was to cross Jacksina Creek to access a hunting area across the valley. But this was no easy feat. Recent rainfall had affected the creek. As such, the water levels were pretty high, even dangerously so. Conditions in the creek vary depending on the weather. Sometimes water levels can change significantly, even within a single day. To make matters more precarious, the paths around the creek were overgrown with plants and brush, and there were no actual trails around that particular area. This was a truly wild part of America's largest national park. Still, David White proceeded with his plans. 4 days later, White's point of contact reached out to park officials. They were informed that White had stopped communicating. At first, the response was moderate, perhaps given the fact that White was supposed to come back from his trip on August 16th. A small aircraft made passes over the park, searching for anyone who might seem in distress. But the initial search didn't turn up anything at all, and when White failed to return by Thursday, the day he was due to complete his trip, the search effort intensified. But everything failed. No plane, no helicopter, no ground or pack rafting team was able to find the man. 2 days later, on August 21st, a pack rafting search team found White's body beside Jacksina Creek, all evidence pointing to the fact that White had been swept away by the current. David White's tragic death is just one of many drownings in the history of Copper Valley. The valley's rivers, lakes, and creeks are very dangerous and have been claiming lives since the gold rush in 1898. It was supposed to be a routine flight, a journey that should have been uneventful, but fate had other plans in store for 45-year-old Christopher Mays and for 36-year-old Andrew Broders. It was February 4th, 2021, a Thursday. At 45, Christopher Mays, who lived in Glenallen, Alaska, was a passionate pilot. He loved flying almost as much as he loved his family and God. Mays was a highly skilled bush pilot. He also had a reputation in the Alaska aviation community, not only because of his skills, but also because he was conscientious and always put safety first. Flying in the winter, surrounded by some of the highest mountains in the United States, brought Mays a unique and singular feeling of peaceful solitude. Christopher Mays was lucky enough to be able to mix business with pleasure. He took his passion and skill and became a pilot for Copper Valley Air Service, a family-owned business providing sightseeing flights, air taxis, charter services, and backcountry or hunting support. His job was to carry U.S. mail and passengers through the Wrangell-St. Elias National Park and Preserve to McCarthy, a remote census-designated place with a population of about 100. That Thursday was no different. Christopher Mays boarded his aircraft, a Cessna 185, and took off. This time around, he wasn't alone. He had a passenger, Andrew Broders. Andrew Broders was 36 years old and a lover of adventure. He was also a man of many trades. He joined the Navy straight out of high school, worked on submarines, and was a talented fisherman. He lived in Washington but came to Alaska twice a year to go gold panning on his property in Dan Creek. Broders always stayed busy with something, so his joining Mays on the plane was just a sign of his adventurous spirit. They took off early that morning and everything went well for a while. The plane flew over Wrangell-St. Elias National Park and Preserve. The park was a sight to behold. More than 20,300 square miles of mountains and valleys, rivers and lakes, glaciers and volcanoes, forests and ice fields. It's an ancient kind of beauty, one that sticks to the soul and speaks to the most primal part of humans. But it's also a dangerous kind of beauty, the background of so many tragedies and lives cut too short. But then, suddenly the moment of peace turned into a moment of terror. The Cessna 185 plummeted to the ground, crashing hard in the forest below, some 13 miles northeast of Chitina. It was just before noon when an emergency locator transmitter was activated from the plane, notifying the Alaska Rescue Coordination Center of the accident. Rescuers immediately flew to the area, but they were welcomed by a horrible sight, and with it came an awful realization. They found the fuselage, the wings, and the engine first. The tail of the airplane was about 200 yards behind them. Christopher Mays and Andrew Broders were both dead, killed by an improbable accident. Alaska State Troopers and the National Park Service worked together to recover the bodies from the remote crash site and return them to their families. The National Transportation Safety Board launched an investigation. Preliminary findings suggested that the plane may have broken up mid-air, which is a very uncommon occurrence, though not unheard of, especially when bad weather is involved. It was around 20 degrees below zero at the time of the crash, but weather didn't appear to be an immediate factor. The wreckage was recovered for examination. Christopher Mays and Andrew Broders may have been killed in this senseless accident, but their memories will live on in the hearts of those who knew and loved them. It began as a journey of adventure and exploration, with two friends setting out to conquer the unruly nature of waters, armed only with a pack raft, a small inflatable raft designed for portability and maneuverability in remote waterways. However, what was meant to be an exhilarating expedition turned into a nightmare. It was August 2nd, 2018, and Aidan Don and his friend were ready to start their new adventure. They were both novices to pack rafting, but one thing they surely didn't lack was enthusiasm. The sport seemed a perfect endeavor for the two of them, young as they were and full of life. What better way to spend their time in Wrangell-St. Elias National Park and Preserve than navigating its tumultuous waters and feeling their hearts pumping adrenaline-rich blood? Don, who was 22 years old, had come all the way from Salzburg, Austria, in order for their planned day-long pack rafting trip. He and his paddling partner were flown into the start point of their Nizina River float, near the lake at the base of Nizina Glacier. But from there it was up to them to navigate the treacherous waters and make it back to safety. The Nizina River, which is glacially fed, is the largest tributary of the Chitina River. Like most rivers in Wrangell-St. Elias National Park and Preserve, the Nizina is cold and silty. Conditions on the river change constantly. Rain and sun can increase the volume and depth of the water. In other words, crossing such a river is no easy feat, and even experts can have a hard time with it. Aidan Don and his friend were no experts. It is unclear whether they knew that unguided trips on the river aren't recommended. If they did, this wasn't enough to stop them. To make matters worse, the two friends were ill-equipped. They weren't wearing personal flotation devices or dry suits, pieces of equipment that can make a difference between life and death. Perhaps unaware of the dangers, the two men set out on the water. 3 miles downriver, though, the paddling partners became separated by more than 100 yards. The situation was less than ideal, but they had to keep paddling. As their raft separated, so did their fates. Soon after they were carried apart, Don's friend realized something was amiss. There it was, a capsized raft. The roaring sound of the river was startling. There was no sign of Don. The friend landed on an island and immediately called for emergency assistance using a satellite phone. As seconds and minutes passed, it became increasingly obvious that Don was in grave danger. Aerial searchers promptly responded to the emergency call. They flew over the river looking for the missing rafter. They made the gruesome discovery about 4 miles farther down the stream from the friend's location on the island. Don's body was lying there, lifeless. The surviving man was picked up, but recovering Don's body wasn't as easy. Additional help was called. Don's body was retrieved the following day at noon on August 3rd with the assistance of Denali National Park helicopter and crew. The body was transported to the state medical examiner, and an investigation was launched. Aidan Don's untimely death serves as a poignant reminder of the inherent risks of exploring the untamed wilderness, urging all who dare to venture into its depths to do so with caution, respect, and above all, preparedness. Pack rafters should always have bailout options because rafts can float away or be blown away. July 10, 2018 was a day like any other, except that Scott Griffith and his wife Nancy were out exploring the untamed beauty of Wrangell-St. Elias National Park and Preserve. The couple had been together for almost 30 years, and each of those years had been filled with lots of adventures. That Tuesday, Scott and Nancy decided to hike the Root Glacier Trail, one of the most popular trails in the park. The trail extends north from Kennecott, an abandoned mining camp located inside the park, to access Root Glacier. The walk is moderate and only about 1.5 miles from Kennecott, but it has many highlights, such as glacier viewing, mining artifacts, and other breathtaking views. But while the terrain of the trail is relatively level, with only moderate changes in elevation, the Root Glacier itself is a whole other deal. It can be very slippery, which makes it dangerous for visitors who lack proper equipment. But Scott Griffith was ready for this endeavor, a literal walk in the park. At 53, he was a very active man who had spent his life helping others, always volunteering and keeping busy with various undertakings. More than anything, though, he loved the great outdoors, a passion he shared with his family. Hiking, fishing, camping, and going on wild sled rides down Haystack Mountain were significant parts of the ex-soldier's life. Griffith would also often chaperone Boy Scout trips, which took him on hikes, long bike rides, and marathons. Griffith was always ready to go, meaning he was very physically fit, and no one could have guessed that an easy-to-moderate hike through the remote park could have anything on him. Griffith embarked on the hike, eager to immerse himself in the pristine wilderness surrounding him. Little did he know this journey would be his last. First, Scott and Nancy Griffith made it to Root Glacier. The day was indeed beautiful, and they had passed multiple groups on the trail. Everyone wanted to bask in the park's special mystique. Then it was time to go back. On their way back, though, Scott Griffith started to feel unwell. Tragedy struck suddenly and unexpectedly. He collapsed on the trail. Nancy was terrified. Park staff, local guide personnel, and bystanders sprang into action, each and every one of them wanting to help. When it became clear that Griffith was unresponsive and had no pulse, the rescuers started CPR. They took turns trying to save the man's life, but it was already too late. After almost an hour of continuous resuscitation efforts, medical professionals advised responders to stop the maneuvers. Scott Griffith was declared dead. He suffered a fatal cardiac arrest, his heart stopping amidst the breathtaking beauty of the Alaskan landscape. News of Griffith's tragic passing left friends and family grappling with the sudden loss of a beloved adventurer, father, and husband. In the wake of Scott Griffith's passing, park officials reminded visitors that while Root Glacier Trail is popular, the area is remote, which means that emergency medical care may be hours away.